Harlan Cut isn't on any current map. It appeared in a 1974 county survey as a census-designated place, population 212, company housing for the workers at the Meridian coal processing site. By 1991, the mine was exhausted and the company gone, and the 212 people went wherever displaced company town residents go, which is everywhere and nowhere specific. The houses stayed. The equipment stayed. The buildings stayed. The county kept the parcel in its records as decommissioned industrial land and never did anything further with it, which is how places like Harlan Cut persist, through the accumulation of administrative inaction rather than through any choice to preserve them. I found it in a county records index while searching for decommissioned mine sites in the southern part of the state. The index listed it as 340 acres, access via Forest Service Road 7714, no active use. I drove out in September to take a look. It was my third time at Harlan Cut when things went wrong. I want to be clear about that. I'd been there twice before, in September and again in November, and both visits were unremarkable. I documented the company store, the mine office, the processing building, the row of company housing along the main road. I found the typical evidence of the usual human passage: old fire rings, spray paint on the mine office exterior that dated by style to the mid-90s, a section of the company store's window boards that someone had removed and replaced loosely. I spent 2 days on the first visit and a full day on the second, and came home with good material and no concerns. The third visit, I came for the tipple. The tipple is the structure at the head of a mine shaft that processes raw coal coming up from below, sorting it, cleansing it, loading it into cars on the rail spur. At Harlan Cut, the tipple sat above the town on the hillside, connected to the processing building below by a series of chutes and conveyors running down the slope. I'd photographed it from the bottom on both previous visits, but hadn't gone up to the structure itself. The approach required crossing a section of hillside that my previous visits had found overgrown and unstable. I came on the third visit with better boots, a machete for the brush, and a full day to spend on the hillside alone. I arrived at 6 in the morning, which is my standard, 2 hours before full light gives me the best conditions for interior shots once I'm set up. I drove the 4 miles of logging road from Highway 22 to the town in first gear, watching the ruts. My truck is an older F-250 with high clearance, and I've driven worse, but I take Forest Service roads carefully because a broken axle 4 miles from a highway is a problem you don't work out of quickly. I parked at my usual spot, at the edge of what had been the main road through the company housing, and got out. The town was exactly as I'd left it. Company housing ran in 2 rows along the main road, 12 houses to a side, identical in construction. Wood frame, painted white once, the paint long reduced to gray scaling, and the wood behind it silver and cracked. Each house had a front porch with the boards buckled, and a small yard the forest had been reclaiming since 1991. The company store sat at the south end of the row, a long, single-story building with a false front and a loading dock on the east side. Past it, the mine office, 2 stories, brick, the only building in town that wasn't wood frame, occupied the corner where the main road met the road running up the hill toward the processing building and the tipple beyond. I'd measured the mine office walls on my second visit. 18-inch brick, solid throughout. The mortar still good on 3 sides, and soft, but intact on the 4th. The second-floor windows were unbroken. Everything else in town had lost its glass within the first decade of abandonment, but the mine office windows had held. I'd spent a long time working out why. My best guess was that the brick walls absorbed the temperature differential driving most window breakage, but I'm not a building engineer, and I left it as speculation. I put on my pack, camera body, 3 lenses, recorder, headlamp, first aid kit, 2 days of water, protein bars, and started up the hill toward the tipple. The approach was better with the machete. I cut a line through the brush along the old supply road, still readable as a road if you knew what to look for. 2 parallel compressions in the ground, slightly lower than the surrounding terrain. The vegetation between them thin and scrubby from decades of compaction before the road went disused. Following it got me to the base of the tipple structure in 40 minutes. The tipple was larger than it read from below. The main frame ran 60 feet up the hillside on timber cribbing that had settled and shifted over 30 years but held upright. The sorting machinery at the top sat enclosed in corrugated steel sheeting, most of it intact, with gaps where panels had come loose and exposed the rollers and screens inside. At the base of the structure, where the clean coal was transferred to the chutes leading down to the processing building, the steel decking was solid. I spent 4 hours on the tipple. Good material. The rusted rollers, the sorting screen still loaded with small coal from the last run, a chalk tally on the inside of one panel someone had been keeping, the marks going from one end of the panel to the other in groups of 5 and then starting again. More than 200 groups. I don't know what they were counting. I photographed everything. It was on the way back down, cutting back through the brush toward the main road, that I found the deer. It lay at the edge of the dry creek bed running along the east side of the property, in the open space where the brush thinned near the water. An adult doe, on her side with her legs extended. My first read was death from natural causes, a heart condition, an injury from somewhere else, old age. Animals die in wooded areas, and I see them occasionally in my work. It is unremarkable as a finding. Then, I looked more carefully. The animal had not been fed upon. Any deer dying in accessible woodland will show significant predation within 24 to 48 hours. The carcass was intact. No bite marks on the haunch or neck, no tearing at the abdomen, no insect activity suggesting exposure over multiple days. It was fresh. The legs were extended deliberately. A dying animal collapses in a twisted, partially folded position determined by how it goes down. The weight and the momentum produce the arrangement, not any intention behind it. These legs were fully extended, all 4, pushed out from the body in an open position. The neck was extended too, the head laid flat. The whole animal had been placed in a specific orientation, with the nose pointing north and the body running along an exact north-south axis. I crouched and examined it for a long time. Then I photographed it from 4 angles, marked the GPS coordinates on my phone, and noted it in my recorder. Creek bed adjacent to east fence line. Adult doe. Fresh. No predation. Body in extended position. Manually arranged. No clear tracks in the dry creek bed. Recording this because it's anomalous. Moving on. I moved on. I spent the afternoon in the company store. My previous visits had covered the main floor, the shelving units still in place, the 1960s cash register on the counter with the drawer open and empty, the Noxema display case on the back wall with 2 jars still in it behind cracked glass. But I hadn't been in the back room, which required moving a collapsed shelving unit across the doorway. I got it moved on this visit and found what had been the storeroom, floor-to-ceiling shelving on 3 walls, mostly empty, with some product remaining on the upper shelves where it had been out of reach and left behind. Louisiane coffee cans, 6 of them, the labels red and white and perfectly preserved in the dim interior, a case of condensed milk with the top cans rusted shut, a stack of ledger books on the highest shelf, the spines facing outward, labeled by year in someone's small, careful handwriting. 1974, 1975, 1976, going back to 1961 at the left end, I got the 1974 ledger down and went through it page by page. Names in the left column, each with a balance figure, and then weekly entries showing purchases against a balance, coal scrip accounting, each worker's wages offset against what they'd spent at the company store. The math ran against the workers in almost every case. I'd expected that, and finding it confirmed wasn't surprising. But there's something different about seeing it in the specific. A name, a week in February 1974, and the numbers working out to a balance that meant the man whose name was on the line had spent more at the company store that week than he'd earned at the mine. I put the ledger back. On my way out, I paused at the front door. A name had been scratched into the doorframe at eye level, on the inside face. H. Vestal, here, 1977. Below it, in different handwriting, still here, 1981. I photographed both. I went back to my truck at 4 in the afternoon, put my pack in the bed, and sat in the cab with the door open eating a protein bar and going through the day's shots on the camera display. The shots were good. The tally marks on the tipple panel especially, and the ledger page with the February entries. I always put my keys in the cup holder when I'm in the field. This is not a policy I decided on consciously. It's a habit that developed over 6 years of leaving equipment in trucks and needing to find things quickly. Keys in the cup holder, every time, without exception. The keys were on the passenger seat. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I picked them up, put them in the cup holder where they belonged, drove to the logging road junction, and spent the night in my truck. I didn't sleep well. I told myself I'd been wrong about the keys. I just moved them without registering it. I'd set them down on the seat while reaching for something in my pack. I developed a new habit without noticing. I went over it until the explanation stopped feeling like reasoning and started feeling like something I was building for myself to stand behind. And then I stopped going over it and watched the tree line through the windshield until it got light. I went back the next morning. The mine office door had been closed and latched on my first visit, and I'd opened it with a pry bar on my second visit to access the interior, and I left it open because a latch that's been forced open won't re-engage without work. The bent receiver plate and the freed latch were in my recorder notes from that second visit. The door was closed. I stood in the road in front of the mine office and looked at it. A standard exterior hinged door, wood, with a thumb latch engaging a receiver plate in the frame. I'd forced the latch on the second visit. The plate had bent outward. There was no functional engagement between the latch and the bent plate anymore. No way to close this door and have it stay closed. And yet, I crossed the road and pushed it open. It swung freely, the bent plate offering nothing. Inside, everything was as I'd left it. I make notes on dust disturbance in several places on each visit. I do this habitually, marking my own tracks so I can read them on return and know if anything has been altered in my absence. Every disturbance was exactly as I'd noted it. Nothing had been moved. No one had been in the building. The door had been pushed closed from the outside. Something had stood on the road in front of this building. After dark, given that my photos showed it open in late afternoon light, reached the door and pressed it closed. The door required no latch engagement to stay shut if pressed firmly against the frame. A push was enough. Then, the thing had left. I stood in the mine office entry hall and turned my recorder on. Day 3. Mine office. Door was closed. Couldn't have closed on its own. Not with the plate bent the way it is. I'm noting this. I'm going to the processing building, and then I'm going back to the truck. The processing building sat between the mine office and the slope up to the tipple, connected to both by structures now reduced to frames. The covered walkway to the mine office collapsed. The conveyor housing running up the hill in corrugated panels, most of them intact. Inside the building, the main machinery ran the length of the floor. The primary crusher at the far end, a sizing screen in the middle section, and the secondary conveyor that had transferred sized coal to the storage area above the rail spur. The marks were on the secondary conveyor housing. The housing was 14-gauge steel. The surface rusted deep brown, but structurally solid. The marks sat on the south face at two heights, chest level and knee level, the same relative spacing I'd read about in a forum thread from West Virginia, the one deleted 6 months after posting and recovered through an archive index. The thread had described marks on stone. These were on steel. Steel gives differently than stone. Stone compresses and powders at the stress point. Steel deforms. The material pushed inwards and displaced to the sides of the pressure channel rather than removed. These marks had done that. Each groove carried a slight raised edge along both sides, where the steel had been pushed outward rather than cut away. The origin points of each groove were the deepest, the metal there compressed to a color different than the surrounding rust. I put a finger into the deepest point of the widest groove, and it went to the first knuckle. My recorder was already running. Processing building. South face of the secondary conveyor housing. Marks on steel at two heights. I'm measuring the vertical spacing between the chest level cluster and the knee level cluster against my forearm. 18 inches. 5 parallel grooves in each cluster, spreading from concentrated origin points. Steel deformed rather than cut. Edges raised on both sides of each groove. Origin depth, first knuckle. This is the same pattern from the West Virginia thread. I'm going to the truck now. I went to the truck. The driver's side rear tire was flat. I crouched and looked at the valve stem. The stem was intact, projecting correctly from the wheel, undamaged. The valve core, the small interior component that seals the stem and holds pressure, was missing. The core had been removed. The threads inside the stem were clean. No stripping, no marks from an improper extraction. Someone had threaded the core out correctly. To remove a valve core cleanly requires a valve core removal tool, an inexpensive instrument available at any auto parts store. A small metal rod with a shaped end that seats in the core and turns it counterclockwise to unthread it. The motion requires the tool and requires precision. The threads are small. Done without the tool, the core typically damages and leaves marks. Done with the tool and correctly, it comes out clean, as I was looking at now. I sat on the ground next to the flat tire and looked at it. Then I got up, pulled the spare from under the truck bed, and started the change. I worked steadily, jack under the frame rail, lug nuts cracked loose before jacking, wheel up and off, spare on. On good ground, the process takes me around 15 minutes. The gravel here was loose, and the jack kept wanting to shift, and it took closer to 25. The crying started when I had the spare in place and was hand-tightening the lug nuts. I knew what it was. The forum thread had described it. It came from the company housing to the north, and the register of it hit somewhere old and animal before anything else got involved. High and wavering, produced without the variation and rhythm that distress behind it would generate. Air through a passage built wrong for the sound. The cry a product of anatomy and nothing else. I decided during the 25 minutes of the tire change that whatever happened next, I was not going to run before I was ready. I finished the tightening sequence, lowered the jack, pulled the flat and the jack from the ground, threw them in the bed, and got in. The crying moved east while I was loading the bed. Not closer. The same distance, roughly 80 yards, but repositioned. Then it stopped. I started the truck and pulled forward onto the access road. The engine died at 50 yards. I turned the key. The engine turned over without catching. I turned it again. The fuel gauge read empty. I'd filled the tank the morning I left home, 3 days prior. The drive to the site and 2 days of idling to charge equipment had used some of it, but not a full tank. 4 years with this truck, and I know how it burns. The gauge should have been closer to a quarter. I got out and walked to the rear of the truck. The fuel cap was on the bumper, centered, balanced with care. I had not put it there. I unscrewed it and looked into the filler neck. The smell that came back was nothing. No fuel vapor. The tank dry. I stood at the rear of the truck for a moment. Then I threaded the cap back on and started walking north toward the highway. The highway was 4 miles up the logging road. I'd covered perhaps 100 yards when the crying came again, from the north. From the timber to the right side of the road, right between me and where I needed to go. I stopped and listened. It was coming from roughly 80 yards ahead, with no indication of movement. I decided to go left, into the timber on the west side of the road, angling around the sound. The crying moved. By the time I'd covered 40 yards through the brush, it was ahead of me again, slightly further west, the same distance maintained. I stopped. The crying went quiet. I stood in the brush and thought about it. Then I went back to the road and started north again. The crying came from the north before I'd covered 30 yards. I turned around and went back to town. Standing in the road with the crying running between me and the highway wouldn't produce anything useful, and I needed to think before I moved again. I sat on the mine office steps with my notebook and drew what I knew. The access road running north from the town to the highway, 4 miles. The town at the south end. My 3 attempts, each blocked at the same relative point. The deviation west, and where the crying had repositioned to hold the same distance ahead of me. I drew it as lines and looked at what I had. The crying had positioned itself north of me every time I moved north. On the western deviation, it had repositioned to match. It had not moved to block the east. It had not moved to block the south. I sat with that. The eastern boundary of the property was the creek bed. Past the creek bed and the east fence, the land ran more to timber and eventually to County Road 7. Not 4 miles of road, but closer to 2 miles of rough terrain in a straight line. Slower, harder, but a different exit than the logging road. The eastern route had not been blocked. Every time I moved north had been covered. The east had been left open. I thought about why. The obvious reading was that the east hadn't been considered, that the thing doing this didn't have a complete model of my options, and was covering what it understood as the exit. The second reading was that the east had been left open on purpose. I drew the creek bed onto my map. The creek bed ran south from the east fence line before cutting east. If I went east, and took the creek south instead of east, the creek bed ran me directly to the mineshaft entrance at the base of the hillside, a vertical drop of several hundred feet. I drew the southern extension of the creek bed. I drew where it ended. The east had been left open because the east, if I followed the creek south instead of east, wasn't an exit. It was a dead end. The creek ran south first before it ran east, and in the dark, I might not notice the difference until I was at the edge. I looked at my map for a long time. The crying had been north, only north, pushing me south back onto the property, toward the one route that looked open and wasn't. This was not territorial behavior. Territorial behavior doesn't require a model of the terrain and the target's options. This was something that understood the geography, understood where I'd try to go, and was managing the available routes accordingly. I folded the notebook and went inside the mine office. The second floor had 4 windows, 2 on the north faced and 1 each on the east and west. From the north windows, I could see the full length of the main road through the company housing to the company store. From the east window, I had the creek bed and the fence line. From the west, the processing building and the beginning of the slope to the tipple. I went to the north window and looked out. The creature stood in the main road, 40 yards north, facing the mine office. I pulled back from the glass and stood against the wall for several seconds. Then, I looked again. Still there. Still facing the building. Motionless. I'll try to be precise about what I saw, because I've had 2 weeks now to work through the images, and I want this to be accurate rather than processed. The face was a face only by position. It sat at the front of the head in the place a face occupies, and that was the extent of it. The mouth ran vertically the full length of the face, crown of the skull to the underside of the jaw, a full-length split. At rest, it was closed, the skin drawn taut across it, and the vertical line of the closed mouth was the only feature. The skin above it ran smooth and flat and unbroken to the top of the skull, across the full span of where the eyes would have been on anything I know of. No orbital ridges, no nose, no ears. A flat, featureless expanse of skin with a single closed vertical line through the center of it, running from top to bottom. The head sat too wide and too flat for any skull I've been able to find reference to. The dimensions were not wrong in a way that read as deformity, but in a way that read as a different set of proportions altogether. A head built for a different skull inside of it. The front limbs made contact with the ground when it stood, the knuckles resting in the road surface. The limbs were too long for the body behind them, the forearm section alone accounting for half the animal's standing height. The joint connecting the front limb to the body sat where a shoulder sits, but the limb running below that joint was built for a posture that kept the front of the animal pitched toward the ground. The body behind the front limbs was large and deep-chested, the mass of it visible even at 40 yards. I estimated the weight at over 400 pounds. It stood in the road facing the mine office for what my recorder later showed was 11 minutes. I watched from the north window, stepping back from the glass when its head oriented toward the building. I don't know if it sees in a way I understand. The face offered no apparatus for it. I stepped back from the glass anyway each time, and when I looked again, it had not moved. Then, it moved. It went east along the road. The gait, a low forward movement that kept the front limbs engaged with the ground. At the east end of the building, it stopped. I moved to the east window and watched it from there. It stood below me, its head tilted slightly upward toward the building's wall. It held that position for perhaps 30 seconds. Then it went south along the east wall, turned at the southeast corner, crossed behind the building along the south wall, came north along the west wall, and emerged from the west side to complete the circuit. It had walked the full perimeter of the building. Then it walked again. The same pace, the same pauses at the corners, the same upward tilt of the head at the walls. On the second circuit, it stopped longer at the northwest corner, which gave it a sight line on both the north and west faces simultaneously, and stood there for several minutes before continuing. I stood at the north window and watched it finish the circuit and walk back up the main road, turn at the far end of the company housing row, come back south along the west side of the road, and stop next to my truck. It stood next to my truck. I had my recorder running. I listened to that section later. I could hear myself breathing during the 11 minutes it stood in the road and during the perimeter walk and while it stood at the truck. The breaths were measured and even throughout. I don't remember working on them. I understood, standing at the north window watching it next to my truck, what I was dealing with. The tire, the fuel, the 3 blocked attempts on the road, the perimeter walk, not a threat display, not an investigation, a count. It had walked the building perimeter to identify the exits. 2 doors, 4 windows on the ground floor, all of them boarded. The ground floor was closed. And now, it stood next to my truck with the patience of something that understood a truck was a vehicle, and a vehicle was how I left, and the truck was therefore a position worth holding. Not territorial, not reactive to intrusion. Strategic. I called for help. My phone had 2 bars in the mine office. I called my contact, Aaron, who knows where I go and checks in when I'm due back, and got a voicemail. I left a message with the GPS coordinates, the access road number, and what I was looking at from the 2nd floor. I texted the same. Then I called 911, gave the coordinates, and explained that I was stranded in an abandoned property with a large, unknown animal between me and my exit, and that my vehicle had been disabled. The dispatcher asked if the animal was threatening me. I said, not at the moment. She asked me to confirm the location and said she'd dispatch. I said thank you and hung up. I had no way to know how long it would take anyone to reach me on a 4-mile logging road. I had half a bottle of water and 3 protein bars. I had my camera, my recorder, my notebook, and a pry bar in my pack. My pocket knife has a 3-inch blade. I looked at the roof. The mine office had a flat roof with a 6-inch parapet, a low wall running the perimeter, original to the construction. On the west side, where the mine office met the company store, the parapet dropped to 3 inches at its lowest point, and the company store roofline was 8 inches below the mine office roofline. If I could get onto the mine office roof and cross to the company store roof, I could cross the company store to its north end. On my first visit, I'd noted a hatch on the company store roof while photographing the interior from the 2nd floor landing of the mine office, visible through the west windows, a wood hatch with a hasp. I hadn't opened it then. I had a pry bar now. If the hatch got me into the company store interior, the back exit was on the south wall. The south wall backed directly onto the creek bed. The creek bed ran east from the south fence line. East, not south. East put me toward County Road 7, not toward the mine shaft. 2 miles of timber instead of 4 miles of road. The creature was north of the building, at my truck. It was out of sight from the south wall. I measured the timing. The perimeter walk had brought it past the south wall twice, each circuit taking roughly 3 minutes. From its current position at the truck, it had no view of the south wall. That south wall was its blind spot, as long as I could cross the roof without drawing it back around the building. I went to the 2nd floor landing, pulled down the attic access, climbed through into the attic space, and found the roof hatch in the flat above. I pushed it up and out and climbed onto the roof. The roof was tin sheeting over timber decking. It moved under me. A dull, slow flex with each step, the metal working against the fasteners that held it to the decking below. I went slowly, distributing my weight, testing each step before transferring onto it. The north parapet was 40 feet away. I had no intention of going near it. From the roof, I could see the full layout of the property below. My truck was 200 yards north and slightly west, and the creature was next to it, its back to the mine office. The company store roof was 8 inches below me at the west edge of the parapet, the gap between the buildings less than a foot. I sat on the west parapet, put my legs over the edge, and dropped. The company store roof was wood shake over decking. It received my landing with a sound that was louder than anything I'd produced in this town over 3 visits. A deep crack running through the decking, followed by a section of shake sliding off the east edge of the roof and hitting the ground below with a clatter that carried. I looked north over the mine office parapet. The creature had turned around. It faced south, toward the company store, its head oriented toward the sound. For a long moment it held that position, the closed mouth, the flat, featureless face turned in my direction. Then it came. Not fast. A deliberate, unhurried walk south along the road, the front limbs covering the ground at the same measured pace I'd watched from the window. It was moving toward the company store. Moving toward me. And the pace was worse than speed would have been. Speed would mean urgency. This was a thing that understood it had time, that a walking pace was sufficient, and it moved accordingly. I moved. The company store roof was 60 feet north to south. I covered it at a run, the decking flexing and complaining under each footfall. I reached the north end and found the hatch. Wood with a hasp. The hasp had a padlock through it. The padlock was rusted solid. I got the pry bar out of my pack, seated it under the hasp plate, and pulled. The screws holding the plate to the decking were old, and the wood around them had gone soft, and the plate came away in one pull. I lifted the hatch, dropped my pack through into the darkness below, hung from the hatch frame, and dropped. I came down onto a shelving unit I'd mapped on my first visit and knew was there. My feet hit the top shelf, and I stepped down from shelf to the floor, moving in the dark from memory, shelving unit to the doorway, through into the main floor, around the collapsed unit across the back doorway. The back door had a simple horizontal bar across 2 brackets. I lifted it, pushed the door open, and stepped out into the creek bed. Behind me, from the front of the company store, the north face, the main entrance, a single heavy impact came through the structure. Not the door giving way. The door was solid and the frame was solid and the impact hadn't opened anything. A contact with the wall, a test, the sound of something putting its weight against the building and finding it closed. Then quiet. I went east along the creek bed at a run. The creek bed ran east for 300 yards before it bent and the east fence came into view. I went through a low section of the fence, the wire rusted and loose at the bottom, and into the timber beyond. For the next 2 hours, I moved through rough terrain in fading light, navigating by the slope of the ground and the position of the sky through the canopy. The creek bed continued east of the fence, and I followed it when I could, leaving it when it bent south, cutting through the timber on a bearing I maintained by keeping the last light in the west at my left shoulder. I turned my ankle on a root at the hour mark, and walked the second hour with one boot half laced to keep the swelling from tightening. I heard the new sound at the 40-minute mark, when I was still in the timber and the creek bed was somewhere to my south and the property fence was behind me. It came from behind me and above the ground level, from back in the property still, I estimated, based on the distance and direction. It was not the cry. The cry was high and wavering, and I knew exactly what register it occupied. This was lower and shorter, and produced by something different in anatomy. A single sound without repetition. It happened once and went silent. I have been going over it ever since. I don't have a reference for it. It wasn't a threat display, as I understand threat displays, which carry duration and repetition. It wasn't the cry. It wasn't a distress signal, and it wasn't a call. The closest framework I found in my research is what behavioral biologists describe as a frustrated problem-solving vocalization. The sound a cognitively complex animal makes when an obstacle changes state unexpectedly, when the solution it was executing stops working. I'm not certain that's what it was. I'm certain it was one sound, produced once, from inside the property after I'd left it. I kept going. County Road 7 came up ahead of me through the trees 2 hours after I'd left the creek bed. I walked out of the timber onto the gravel shoulder and stood there for a moment, breathing. A logging truck came north 20 minutes later, and I stepped into the road and flagged it. The driver pulled over and looked at me through the passenger window without expression. "Truck broke down on 7714, I said. "Been walking." He unlocked the door and I got in, and he drove me to the county hospital in Alderton without asking further questions. I've thought about that a fair number of times since. The ER found a sprained left ankle from the route I'd missed, 2 lacerations on my right forearm from the hatch frame on the company store roof, and a hairline fracture at the xiphoid process from the landing on the shake roof. The ER doctor asked what had happened, and I told her I'd had an accident in the timber after my truck broke down, and I'd gotten turned around in the dark. She looked at my forearm, looked at my chest, and wrote it down. A county officer made contact the next morning. I gave a statement. Fuel line failure. Disoriented in the timber. Took the wrong direction. He asked whether I wanted to report a large animal sighting. I said no. He filed what he filed. I've been home for 2 weeks. There are things I want to put in one place before I post this, because the specific details matter, and I've been sitting on them long enough. The valve core. A valve core is a small brass component that threads into the interior of a tire valve stem. It's the part that holds pressure. Without it, air escapes freely through the open stem. To remove a valve core without damaging the stem requires a valve core removal tool, a small instrument that inserts into the stem and turns the core counterclockwise to unthread it. Done without the tool, the core typically deforms on removal, leaving marks on the threads inside the stem. Done with the tool and done correctly, it comes out clean. I've examined the stem photographs I took at the truck. No marks on the threads. That removal was correct. I looked up the tool, found it, bought one and practiced with it on a spare valve stem I picked up from a salvage yard. The motion requires holding the tool steady while applying rotational pressure. It requires the ability to grip a metal rod less than 3 inches long and maintain consistent torque through several full rotations. It requires functional fine motor control in a hand-equivalent structure. I've been in contact with a wildlife biologist at West Virginia University. Their name appeared in a 2019 journal article on unclassified large mammal sightings in decommissioned industrial zones in eastern coal fields. I found the article through a citation index while searching the forum thread I'd recovered from the archive. I emailed him 3 weeks ago with my photographs and my account. His automated reply confirmed the email was received. I haven't heard back. His faculty page was last updated in 2019. The 1987 County Extension Wildlife Survey I'd found previously, the one listing an unclassified large mammal sighting near a decommissioned mine site in the same county, with field notes describing front limb placement inconsistent with any known species and body mass estimated above 400 pounds, had ended with "See attached" in a handwritten note at the bottom of the final page. No attachment existed in the digitized county records index. I requested the physical file from the county extension office 3 weeks ago. They acknowledged receipt of the request. I'm still waiting. The photographs from my third visit to Harlan Cut are on my camera. The camera is in my pack, in my closet. I've processed the shots from the tipple and the company store and the mine office and the deer carcass. I haven't processed the shots from after I went to the truck, which is when I had the recorder running continuously and the camera on automatic interval. I know what the interval shots will have captured from the roof of the mine office, and I haven't been ready to look at it yet. I'll get there. I posted this account to document what happened, and to put the specific details. The valve core, the road blocking, the perimeter walk, the new sound, in one place where someone can find them. If you've read this far and something changes with my situation, the camera with the unprocessed shots is black, Nikon, cracked thumb grip on the bottom right corner. The pack is in the closet behind the camera bag. My login for the County Records Index is in my Notes app under County Docs. The biology professor's contact information and the full text of the 2019 article are in the drafts folder of this account. My account also has research files organized by state. If you're gonna look, start with West Virginia. I found 6 other sites in that state alone. Hey everybody, that's it for today's story. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. This particular story was written by author Justice Figueroa, also known as Pentyworth223 over on Reddit. I featured a few stories by this author on the channel previously, the Skinned Man series, as well as a bunch of other stories. So, if you enjoy their work, please check out the description below. I'll include a link to their Patreon page, as well as to some of their other work, their books on Amazon. Justice Figueroa is also one of the 2 people who did the cover design for the new Hollow's End book, so huge thank you to him for doing that. This story I thought was really good. I kind of enjoy these urban exploring type stories, abandoned towns, ghost towns, stories like this where there's a lot of technical details and things that I personally would have no idea how to write out and put in a story. Really good descriptions in this one, I thought. I also liked how the actual monster, bad guy character is... You never really totally figure out what it is. It's kind of a mystery even to the end, which I always personally enjoy a little bit of mystery. I like stories that don't explain every little detail, personally. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. I mentioned on the channel on Monday, the Hollow's End books are going to be coming out on July 1st, and I'll include another link for the pre-order below if anybody wants to pre-order the Kindle edition. That's the ebook edition. That's the only one I'm able to put out for pre-order right now. And the links for paperback and hardcovers are going to be on the channel. I'll share about that in about a week when that comes out on Amazon officially. Alright, that's all I have for today, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this one, and I'll see you again on Friday with a new story. Alright, have a good one.